Denny has a Master's of Science in Marriage and Family Therapy and currently works as a trauma therapist at Utah Valley Counseling, where she specializes in trauma, addiction, and marital issues. Denny has worked in the mental health field for over 10 years, and she's also an adjunct faculty at Brigham Young University, where she has taught multicultural families and human development. She's also supervised MFT students with their Spanish-speaking clients. Today, Denny's presentation is titled Sex Starts in the Kitchen, where she will help you understand the emotional parts of a healthy sexual relationship, learn about the sexual cycle for males and females and why it's important to not only understand, but adapt to those differences in both, and learn why it is important to communicate about sex on a regular basis and practical tips on how to do it. Denny will hold an anonymous Q&A session for the final 15 minutes of this 1-hour webinar. So please feel free to write your questions down as they come up so you can remember them for that portion of the workshop. And I will have the chat disabled. So save your questions for the end. We're really excited for that portion. This workshop is also approved for 1 continuing education credit. You can email me at marriagecommission@usu.edu to request a certificate. And this presentation is being recorded and will be sent to you tomorrow, so you can access it and send it to friends, and always turn back to it at any time. So thank you so much, Denny, for being here, and I'm just so excited to hear from you, and I want to turn the time over to you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I'm excited to be here too. I can't obviously see everyone that is here, but it's a very personal topic, right? But it's one that I think we need to talk more about, right? So let me really quickly here share my screen, and let's get started. Okay, here we go. So yeah, so the title is Sex Starts in the Kitchen, and that's, just something that alludes to the complexity of our sexual relationships. That is not just about understanding the physical aspects of it, although that's part of it, and we'll go over that. But we're truly, complex human beings, and the sexual experience is definitely falls under that category. Okay, so why are we talking about sex, right? I mean, I think sometimes we forget that we are sexual beings. Like, we were born sexual beings. And what do I mean by that is we were born with basically every single thing biologically, emotionally, that drives us to connect to others, right? So a big part of sex is connection. And as soon as basically our bodies are able to experience, through puberty and all of that, the biology catches up with that, and we experience arousal and such. So we are definitely sexual beings. And I think that's a big part of a healthy sexual relationship, just accepting, hey, I'm a sexual being. And we'll get into the differences between men and female. Sexual relationships are an integral part of a healthy relationship. It's absolutely healthy, and it needs to be a part of your relationship to be having sex. Why? It just falls back onto the first one. We are sexual beings, and we connect a lot through our body and through ways that are not verbal. So that's why, so much of our communication is nonverbal, and I think sex falls under that category as well. And why is this important? Why am I talking about sex, right? Because I was given a choice. I'm like, okay, what do I want to talk about, right? I specialize in trauma, but I was like, I just don't think I can do just 40 minutes of trauma, right? But I'm like, what else am I dealing with right now with so many couples, with so many clients, that regardless of what they come in to see me, usually either their sexuality, their sex life, it's just something that pops, and it's just not very satisfying, right? So there are far too many couples that do not enjoy their sex life, and their relationship suffers as a whole. And that, for me, whenever they tell me, like, I'm just not enjoying this, it just makes me really sad, right? Because it can be an absolutely amazing experience, not just physically, but emotionally as well. So this is an actual issue, right? At least here in Utah where I practice. It's a big thing. I think that whether you're in a relationship or not, your own sexuality is just something that comes up with most of my clients. Okay, so what are the essential parts of a healthy sexual relationship? And there's obviously more, right? I think, like I said, I think sex is complex, but I wanted to give you a little something, I guess, in the 40 minutes that I have for you to expand on that, right? So this for me, I'm like, if I narrow it down, what do I talk about the most with my clients? Where are the areas that they're having a lot of difficulty with? These are usually the 4 that come up. So we want to start like, what is your relationship with yourself as a sexual being? It's really, really hard to have a satisfying sexual relationship with another person when you're not comfortable with your own nature as a sexual person. So that's, I think we'll get more into that, right? Sexual education. This is a big one. I think that if you grew up in a family in which your parents were super open and there was not shame about sex and all that, like, I have come to believe that's more of the exception. Most of my clients, like, okay, we talked about it once, or we didn't talk about it at all, and it just wasn't a conversation that I had with somebody else that were not my peers, or even with the peers. Sometimes it was like, oh man, this is uncomfortable. So we're lacking in our understanding, not just of basic biology, sometimes I feel like, but of how sex works physically in terms of differences in males and females, our own anatomy, in order to truly understand how to make the most out of the experience. Direct communication, very much tied to our culture around sex. Couples do not talk about their sex life. It's very uncomfortable. It is a vulnerable topic, there's no question. But it's very wishy-washy. We beat around the bush. And when we're talking about something as essential and as important as sex, you need to have very clear and, yes, caring kind of communication. So communication about sex is lacking. And then routines and rituals, we'll get into that a little bit more, but healthy couples, that have a very satisfying sex life, have a kind of like a rhythm to how they very intentionally implement the sex desire, the sensual, we'll talk more about that, into their married life. So we'll talk about that. So let's start with, well, it's not switching, I don't know why. Oh gosh, okay, don't know why I did that. There we go. Okay, so let's start with the first one, just sexual relationship with self, right? And this is where, just for yourself, I want you to think, okay, what was the culture around sex in my family? We kind of touched on this, when I introduced it, but just for yourself, right? What was the culture around sex? Did we talk about it? How old was I when I was told about these things? For females particularly, right, is how was female sexuality viewed at home? Was that even a thing, right? Ejaculation, your period, like all of those things that you go through, how were those things discussed, if at all? Right? So that's one thing to consider, right? It's not necessarily this thing of like, oh, I'm going to blame my parents for my bad sex life. It's not about that. It's to bring awareness that there is a reason why sometimes we perceive sex the way we do, and why we have difficulties in certain areas. So the family of origin, right? Then the cultural environment. Here in Utah, we have a pretty heavy religious population, right? So even if you're not religious, if you grew up around that, it's really hard to escape the notions that there's a lot of shame associated with sex, sexual curiosity. And if you're particularly, LDS, especially as a female, right, is the no, 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 no. And then you get married and it's supposed to be this like, oh, it's supposed to be this amazing. All of a sudden you have to, just flip the switch. And that's problematic, right? So just kind of thinking about like, what kind of an environment did I grew up with, right? How was sex perceived? Was it okay to ask questions? Sexual curiosity, was it treated as like this is normal, or is like, oh my gosh, no, we have to stop? A lot of shame, right? So just kind of think about that, right? Because this is a very, like I said, I want to, even though this applies to a lot of people, right? Your own sex history is very, very personal. So I think you have to start making just a mental inventory right now, right? It's like, oh man, I wasn't talked about these things at all, or there was a lot of shame in my environment, so I don't feel comfortable. Body image, this is a big one, especially for females. How did females around you talk about their body, right? And that has an impact on your ability to enjoy sex, right? Because your body is completely 100% involved with that. So that gives me to the second one, right? Like, how do you feel about your body? Most of us, have a little bit of a complex relationship with our body, but in order to enjoy a healthy sexual relationship, there needs to be a level of comfort with your body. And I'll get a little bit more into that when we discuss anatomy, right? But I feel like when there's discomfort with my body, I am not curious about my body. So I never get to figure out, okay, this is me as a sexual being. I don't know that side of myself. Okay. Shame. So I already kind of touched on that, so I won't talk about that a little bit more. But in order to enjoy sex, you really need to remove shame. We need to remove shame from sex, period. It's impossible, and we'll talk about the sexual cycle, right? But in order to build desire, arousal, like shame is a mood killer. As soon as I see that with my couples, I'm like, okay, we need to deal with the shame first and foremost. Your body cannot, it's like it shuts down, right? And then your likes and your dislikes, and that is very much tied to how much you know your body, how much you're willing to be curious about your body, and explore either yourself or with your partner, right? So that is the first one. Now, sexual education, we could spend really the full 40 minutes just on this one. It's a big one. I'm still surprised in a lot of ways how so many couples get married or get together, and the extent of their sex education comes from Hollywood movies or pornography or just conversations with peers, right? But it's like, okay, we don't really have an understanding of how to really maximize our experience because we don't understand our body. So first, anatomy. I think honestly, with men, like this is a lot easier. So I'm a mom of boys. I don't have any girls, and I have noticed right from the get-go that because your sexual organ, your penis is exposed right since you're born, there's this kind of like comfortable awareness of it, if that makes sense. You're aware of what from a very early age that something feels good, right? You are, I think, more in touch in some ways, right, with your sexual organ, and since everything is exposed, there's a lot more understanding of what each part actually looks like and what it does. For females, for us women, it's very different. Ours is not exposed, right? And unless we are doing a particular activity, we don't really get to experience like, okay, this is what it feels like when it feels good. Like we don't get that kind of an experience. So I find that understanding anatomy is a lot more about understanding female anatomy. and understanding that, you know, we call, just give an example when we're talking about sex, right? I'm like, if I'm asking a couple, like, can you name the parts of female genitalia? And it's always like, oh, well, you know, the vagina, like, okay, where is the vagina, right? And a lot of people confuse the vagina with the vulva, right? So the vagina is actually the canal, right? It's this kind of barrel-like thing, right? And then you have the vulva, which are the actual lips. And few of them really, it's surprising. They obviously know about the clitoris, but they don't know where it is. They don't know much about it. They just know, well, it's supposed to feel really good. So it's very disappointing when it doesn't. So just as a little understanding of this, right? When I tell a woman, like, your clitoris has really literally no other function than to provide pleasure. And what you see on the outside is only about 10-20% of its actual size. Most of it is actually inside, right? So there's a lot of nerve endings. So it's just understanding this is how my anatomy works. And how do I know then if I'm experiencing desire, if I'm aroused? We'll get to that, right? For males, that's a lot easier. So I feel like a basic anatomy, let's just look at the terms, let's look at what it does and see for females, especially, what does it look like for me? Because no female genitalia is the same, just like the same for males. Okay, so I'll skip a little bit of the sexual response cycle because I have a little picture to go along with that. So we can cover it a little bit more. Emotional differences. So this one is a big one. And this goes along with the sexual response cycle. And there is emotional differences in terms of, it's mostly in the desire phase. Okay, so maybe I should go to the next slide. Okay, so the sexual response, like, I want to show this because I'm like, okay, with a little caveat that it's really, even though I'm showing it here and it's a little bit linear, it's really a lot more like circular in a lot of ways. You can go back and you can go forth, especially females. So for males, once you've peaked, you have your, orgasm, then you have resolution. There's no going back unless there is a period of, I need to recoup. For females, though, it's a lot more, it's a lot less linear. Okay, we'll get into that. So the first stage, if you want to call it that, right, it's actually not in here, which I think is very telling of, we don't pay too much attention to this, but it's the desire phase. And this is one that is just very different in a lot of ways for males and females. Desire for females is really built a lot on the quality of the relationship. A lot of desire, that's why, like, sex starts in the kitchen, right? Like, if you're having a lot of positive interactions with your partner and loving and caring thoughts about your partner, a woman is way more likely to experience desire. And this is not the same as arousal. I'm not talking about when blood flow is starting to, go to the genitalia. This is before that, right? This is when she's kind of making a conscious decision of, I want to engage in something sexual, in something sensual. So desire is very, very important. And this is where a lot of my couples struggle, because they're usually like, well, she's not in the mood, right? Which really means I'm just not experiencing a lot of desire. And this is, I want to put, part of it is a lot of the positive association with the relationship as a whole, about your partner, but a lot of it, of the desire, also has to do with how comfortable are you with making a choice to be sexual. So this is where I'm like, okay, we need to unwrap a little bit about your relationship with self. It's really hard to make a conscious decision of like, okay, I want to be sexual with my partner if you feel so uncomfortable with your own sexuality, right? So this stage for females is one that, and we'll talk a little bit more about it, but there's several things you can do to nurture this, right? Nurture your relationship. nurture yourself, if you're feeling good about your body, work on your body image. For males, absolutely, it's not as heightened, right, in some ways of the relationship quality, but I have noticed with a lot of males, contrary to popular belief, that it's like, oh, males can just do it whenever and with whoever, which is a huge disservice to the men in our lives, right? Like there needs to be also some sense of safety and attachment, right, for desire to build. It doesn't take, I think, as many variables as it does for females, right? But definitely, for example, physical exhaustion can absolutely inhibit desire in both males and females, right? What is interesting is that stress can sometimes increase desire in men, right? Because like, okay, oh man, having sex with my wife really, really helps my body distress. I feel connected. Whereas for females, if I feel stressed, I'm not going to feel desire. So that's just something to keep in mind. Then the next stage, right, is the arousal phase. And this is purely mostly physical, biological, right? With males, it's pretty easy to spot. There's, you have an erection and, your body's telling you I'm ready to go. For females, it's not as easy to spot, right, as you would expect. And this is, you got a lot of blood rushing to the vulva, so it gets engorged. It usually changes color. The breasts also get engorged, and usually this is when you start lubrication, right? So if you can see, like, there's no way for a woman to lubricate unless she has experienced desire and then spend some amount of time in the arousal phase. What I'm seeing a lot of the time is couples jumping. They skip desire altogether for females, right? They barely have a very, very short arousal phase. The woman has not started lubricating and they jump straight to sex. So during the arousal phase, this is when the uterus kind of expands, which makes, you could say, it changes its shape in order for sex to be comfortable. It just extends and it kind of goes up. It increases pleasure and it also makes it comfortable. So if it stays in its regular spot and in its regular shape, sex is going to be uncomfortable. So this is why I'm like, men in your life, this is when you need to spend time in the arousal phase with her. This is the foreplay, right? This is we'll talk about anticipation and things like that, right? Working on your relationship, because a lot of females experience sex, and a lot of females experience pain during sex, sorry. So two things about that. I don't have a lot of time to discuss all the ins and outs of that. Definitely first go get checked, because sometimes there are physical reasons for that. But a lot of the times it's just like, we're just not taking our time. And if that uterus has not changed its shape and gone up, sex is going to be uncomfortable and painful. So just something to keep in mind. Then we have the plateau, right? Which is usually extended foreplay, or we're actually, engaging in sex, but it's not, we have not reached orgasm, right? So this is the time for females, right? That really makes a difference whether we are going to be able to orgasm or not. So this is the part where it's like, okay, how do we get female to orgasm? We'll talk more specifically about that in another slide, because I feel like we could talk for hours on just female orgasm, right? So just as a point, right? We have orgasm, which females can have more than one, and then we can have a resolution. Or we can have resolution, like it says there, right? Plateau, resolution, we don't orgasm, and then we go down, right? And for males, orgasm, right, ejaculation, and then very quick resolution. So this is, again, just a little bit of an explanation, but it can vary, right? We're not machines, okay? We'll get more, like I said, into female orgasm, just kind of bear with me. Trying to go as quickly as I can, checking here the time. Okay, communication. Man, this is a big one, okay? I have noticed that most of the couples that have a very healthy sex life are are adaptable and flexible. They do not mind changing plans, right? Hey, I don't feel well. I know we made these plans. Can we do something else? There is a lot of conflict when there's been like an expectation that sex is going to happen and then it doesn't. So what I always tell all my couples, like, sex is always optional. It needs to be always optional. So when it happens, it's wonderful. But if it doesn't, it doesn't have to become this thing of like, man, now you've crushed all my hopes and dreams and, left me high and dry. So the power of being flexible. And this is particularly important for couples that are going through transitions. And what do I mean by that? So for example, after she has the first baby, there's a lot of physical changes, emotional changes, and maybe what worked for you in your sex life before that is not going to work. And you have to adapt, you have to be flexible, you have to find new ways to feel connected and experience pleasure. So it's the couples that's like, okay, we have found a set thing and we do not want to deviate from that have a lot of problems with all the transitions. Aging is normal and it's natural, and we need to adapt. We need to adapt to the changes, not just in our bodies, but in the changes in the relationship. Even if it is for the better and we're getting closer, we need to be flexible. So that's one thing. When you talk about sex, really be mindful of extreme statements, black and white kind of statements, right? And we're going to live in the shades of gray, right? We're going to be flexible. We're going to adapt. Redirect. What I mean by that, so we're getting more into when you're actually engaging more sexual behaviors. What do I mean by that? Most females, especially with newlyweds, hopefully not so much the ones that have been married for a long time, but it still happens, that the partner, the male is doing something and she doesn't like it, and the issue is she doesn't tell him. So what do I mean by redirect? Redirect your partner towards something, an area or rhythm, a pressure that is good for you. That's what I mean by direct communication. This could go both ways. It's not just the female, but the male, absolutely. If you want something in particular, you're feeling like, absolutely, voice what you want. So that's why it's so important. The first one is sexual relationship with self. You cannot redirect if you don't know what you like. Okay, so it's important to redirect and actually, like, I'm not feeling that right now, or I have never actually really liked that. Can we do this instead? And we need to really build that kind of trust and confidence in the relationship that this is actually really, really healthy and really good. To just let them know, like, when you did that, I love that. This, not so much. Or can we do more of that? Right? That was cut too short. So basically, it's okay to say, hey, I'm not feeling that. That's most of the issues that I see. Anticipation, what I mean by that. So this is 100% related to desire. And this is very important for females. A lot of the times, not always, right? But biology-wise, males have a much easier time transitioning from a non-sexual state of being to a sexual state of being. We females, unfortunately, it takes a little bit more time. It takes a little bit more effort. So the power of anticipation is little things throughout the day. If you've either indirectly or directly decided, I would love to have sex with you today, do your wife, your partner a favor, and build that. What I tell most of the couples, like, don't go straight for the goods, okay? So if you've decided, hey, it's the weekend and I would love to connect with you, it's okay to turn on the flirtatiousness. Like, I know for a fact, when you were dating, you were being flirty with each other, right? It's a thing, and it's like, okay, why did that go away, right? A lot of couples really love sending each other texts, right? It doesn't have to be necessarily a sex text, although if you're comfortable with that, go for it. But it can be something like, if you're, the husband or, male partner, you look great. I love you, right? So building that connection, building that anticipation. And this is where we get into the area of fantasy, which is we don't talk about fantasy when it comes to females. I think, again, males, just the way they're raised and the culture, it's more acceptable, more allowed, if you want to call it that, for you to have fantasies and to verbally talk about them. For female, like, we don't talk about, like, am I picturing myself being with my spouse, with my partner? So this is when, I feel like you can be a little bit playful, right? However you want to build anticipation for sex, whether that is very direct, right? We're going to be sending each other sexy texts, or through connection, or through playfulness, right? Playfulness, I cannot emphasize this now, is so important for your sex life. Playfulness really creates a mood of relaxation, right? You cannot enjoy sex if you're stressed out and tense. So building that anticipation, especially for females, is very, very important. So throughout the day, right, if you have decided, hey, we would love to have sex, right? Building that anticipation is important, and that's a form of communication. And then the last one, right, is not any less important: love and connection. Tell your partner that you love her, that you love him, right? Tell them, like, okay, when I'm with you, right, I feel really connected, I feel loved. It's more than just, hey, when you touch me, that feels good. Well, that's part of it, right? But really expanding the experience. Okay, let me check here at the time. We have 8 minutes. Okay, routines and rituals. Okay, so what I mean by playfulness is that you got to experiment. You just have to experiment, because especially if you don't have a lot of experience, right, with sex, you don't really know what you like and what you don't like. So it's okay to experiment and be like, that was fun. It wasn't the best, maybe physically, but it was fun, right? Or that was great. So this is more of the spontaneous, right? We want a really spontaneous thing, but that can't always happen, especially for those that already have kids, right? So it's okay to plan to have sex, to be intentional about sex. Foreplay. It's a lot of couples have what do you call it? Some kind of routines and rituals when it comes to foreplay. And I don't mean like a set of behaviors necessarily, right? But they make sure they're going to have privacy, that they're not going to be interrupted. They leave their phones on silent. They take away their smartwatches, so like they can be completely present. That's what I mean. Viewing sex as a source of connection. We've kind of talked about that. And our culture really, really emphasizes the sexual, which is basically, like I said, going straight for the goods. We go straight into touching our sexual, the sexual parts of our body. And really, for a very healthy and even pleasurable sex life, we need to focus not just on the sexual, right? But first and foremost, the romantic and the sensual. And what do I mean? That the romantic, I think it's a given. We understand what we mean by romantic, right? And that can change from couple to couple, so I'm not going to go too much into that. Whatever you consider romantic, but sensual is something that we don't focus on. We don't focus on it at all. And in fact, again, most pop culture is the sexual. We don't focus on the sensual. And what do I mean by the sensual is any kind of, first of all, touch that is not a sexual part of your body, right? And this is so important in foreplay and desire building, that we recognize there's other parts of our body that are very sensitive, right? They're not necessarily sexual parts, but if we can learn how to touch and how to navigate those areas, then the sensual moves into the sexual. So that's what I was saying, that a lot of couples skip the romantic, the sensual, and go straight to the sexual. And that is just a recipe for disaster, especially for the female who's just not going to enjoy that. So really, really focusing on sensual touch, sensual environment. You know, a lot of couples really don't enjoy, you know, if it's a little like kind of like a candlelight situation, that's sensual. It's not necessarily sexual, right? Certain smells, right, that help, kind of what you think of like setting the mood. That's more of like the sensual aspect. But also our bodies, right? Focusing on the sensual aspects of our body and not going straight to the sensual. Okay. Okay, so specific techniques, we're getting into more, this is when we get into the female orgasm, okay? Sensate focus. I feel this is the sensual, you could say, the sensual exercise that I feel like all couples, regardless of what struggles they're going through, need to do. You just need to engage in sensate focus, period. What is sensate focus? Okay, so it's basically an exercise in which you're with your partner, and I would recommend probably, you know, either wearing like a swimsuit or just being in, you know, underwear and such. Basically, you want to keep the sexual parts, if you can, at least to begin with, covered. And why am I saying that? Because we're not going to touch the sexual parts. We're not going to do that. The sensate focus is all about, I'm going to touch your body and you're going to focus on that and tell me if you want me to change it, if you want more pressure, if you want a different kind of touch, and really connect with which areas of my body feel good to the touch, right? So it's kind of like almost like a massage, like a more sensual massage, if you want to call it that, and really resist the urge of like, okay, now I want to touch something sexual. It's not about that. It's about understanding the body, which parts feel good, and developing that trusting relationship, right? That your partner is fully intent on watching your nonverbals, so they learn to distinguish, oh, this is how I know when it feels good, if that makes sense. So becoming in tune. Okay, transitioning. What do I mean by that? Most of us, you know, especially if we've been working all day long, taking care of kids, we need a transitioning period, so that then we can make a choice to become sexual, you know, sensual beings. And that is a very personal thing, right? But I think there needs to be a transition period. A lot of the times we just, and if it happens, that's great, right? Sometimes like, okay, I can't wait to put the kids to bed, and then we jump straight to sex, and that's fine. But usually when that happens is because there's been a building period. There's been anticipation, right? But for the most part, it's like most of us need a transition in periods to decompress. So reading a book, going on a walk, so that our body can kind of settle and then transition into any kind of sensual or sexual behavior. Okay, body postures. I could spend a lot of time on this one, but this is especially important for females. This is very much tied to female orgasm. When you're not comfortable, when you feel ashamed, when there's something in your body you don't want, a lot of the times, even talking about sex, just notice your body posture. It's a more closed up kind of posture. We don't want to accentuate certain areas of our body that we don't like. So practicing more open postures, or postures that helps us feel, how do I call it, more relaxed, that we're able to let go a little bit more, absolutely facilitate desire, arousal, and definitely orgasm. So female orgasm, it is what I tell all my couples, right, is that you do need to know anatomy, because most females need direct stimulation in the clitoris to be able to orgasm. If you're able to get a vaginal orgasm, then kudos to you, you're one of the minority, right? But most females need direct stimulation. And I have to, kind of put it on the side that this comes after a period of arousal. Like you need sustained periods of arousal. So this is why, if you've done enough of the sensate focus, then you can definitely move into an exercise. And this is a trust building exercise, right? In which your partner takes its time to get to know your genitalia, right? It's like, what do you like? Where is your clitoris? How do you want to be touched there, right? So the pinnacle of all my couples that come is like, I want to be able to orgasm, right? And they haven't been able to. So female orgasm is definitely more complicated than male orgasm, but it's definitely, it's not this thing that only happens to certain women. All women are absolutely 100%, unless there's something physical, right, capable of having not just one but multiple orgasms. So it is important to understand, first of all, okay, I gotta know where the clitoris is, and I gotta know how I want it touched. Most of the time we think like, okay, we go straight to hard and fast. That usually doesn't work unless the female is really, really aroused already. Most of the time you need to start like slow and steady and build, and that's where the direct communication comes in. She will let you know when she wants it a little bit faster or a little bit harder. So I think it's that understanding of the body and communicating that makes the female orgasm something that is possible. Okay, so just to finish off, and I have to move some stuff here because actually it's kind of covering the quote. Okay, sex lies at the root of life, and we can never learn to reverence life until we know how to understand sex. And I really, really love this quote because I love the word reverence, just because it is, I feel like it's something that has been cheapened in our culture. And it's such a wonderful experience, and in all degrees, not just physically, but emotionally, in the way that it connects us, right? I could have gone the whole hour talking about all the hormones that get released, love hormones, connecting hormones, bonding hormones, right? And how much it really does for our relationship. So I think if you're going to take time in anything in your relationship, we focus on communication, we focus a lot on so many things. We don't give our sex life the time. And I feel like that is a huge disservice to not just your relationship, but yourself as a human being, right? That this is something that can and absolutely, I feel like it should be an amazing experience, and not something that so many couples dread and have a lot of sadness and even anger associated with. So I feel like that is it. So again, it's not letting me go into the next slide, but the next slide just says questions. So let's go ahead with the questions, and I finished on time, so we're good.
I'll just pop in and give everyone some instructions on how to ask questions. So you can ask questions through the Q&A feature, not the chat. And there's also an option to submit your question anonymously if you don't want your name attached.
Okay. So first question just popped in. How can I help my partner gain confidence in their sexuality and desires? This is a great question. And I think the partner can facilitate the gaining of confidence just by helping them know that they're attractive, desirable. That's a big one. We didn't talk about desirability, right? Because it's one thing to say, oh, you're attractive, right? But you're sexually desirable to me, and what that means to you, right? But a lot of the times it's just facilitating an environment, a safe environment in which your partner can do a lot of that self-work that is necessary to improve the sexuality and desire. So if you create an environment in which, like, no question that you ask, nothing that you bring to the table is going to be like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you're asking that, then I think that really facilitates your partner's ability to work on that themselves. So I think you can facilitate. I'm leery of saying like you can do that for them because you can't. So a lot of sexual, you could say a healthy sex life, right? That's why I put in the first one is you got to do self-work. You got to do a lot of self-work, and that takes time, but it's time well spent. How to improve self-confidence in body image. Oh man. So if I remember, actually, there's going to be another presentation that touches a little bit more on this, right? By, oh my gosh, I forgot her name. Her husband and I were colleagues. So, okay, so we could spend a 2-hour webinar on just this. I think it is important to kind of start, how do I call it? Kind of making sure that we have a clear definition of what it means to be sexy. And what do I mean by that? When we feel like what does a sexy body look like, we usually see models or actresses, people who are, in the, entertainment, business, and how that looks like, right? And I think it is important to change that narrative, right? It's like, okay, how do I basically not only reject that, because anybody, like everybody has a sexual body, and I think realizing my body where it's at is absolutely a sexy body, right? I don't have to look a certain way for me to feel sexy, and that's a work, and I get that, and there's days that you feel sexy, there's days that you don't, and that's completely normal. But I think first of all, we have to really start on, in a way, unraveling what are our assumptions about a sexy body, right? We can't gain confidence until we realize what I perceive as a sexy body, it's not necessarily accurate. It doesn't have to be accurate, and a lot of times it's not even healthy, right? Because all these people are not showing exactly how their body looks like, or they have gone through really unhealthy measures to look like that. Most people don't look like that. So I think we have to start with that. Like, what is a sexy body, right? For me, my definition, obviously, most of us, if we go by that, like our body's not going to fit that definition. So I have to create a new definition of what it is actually like. Okay, what are some tips for having sex for the first time to make it comfortable and a good experience, especially for women? Oh, this is such a good question. Okay, so first of all, I have to speak about safety. I have a lot of teenage girls, and most of the time they disclose to me, not to the parents, that they've had their first sexual experience. And first of all, I think you have to realize you have to be safe. You have to be safe. And what do I mean by that? You have to go the extra mile in using protection and knowing something about your partner, right? STDs are a thing. You that will absolutely ruin your first experience if you find out later on that you didn't take enough precautions and now you're dealing with a situation. So I think definitely you need to be safe. You need to protect yourself, and you need to have some kind of understanding of safety with whoever your partner is. Comfortable. This is a big one. And if you go to I would say any competent gynecologist, if you tell them, hey, I'm getting ready for a first time, like they don't really need to ask you a lot of questions. You can, there's this kinds of like plastic tubes that come in different sizes, and they kind of look like a penis. And basically you progress from the smallest one up until the biggest one that is going to be just a more of an average penis size. And what that does is it creates flexibility in your vagina, right? Because a lot of the times it's that first experience is just very painful because that flexibility is just not there. So it might still be a little bit painful, but it's not going to be nearly as painful because you've been doing your due diligence in getting your body ready for it, right? Now the other part is emotional, right? Like if you've decided, okay, I want to have sex, what do you hope to gain from it? So what I tell my teenage girls is you have a lot of say on your sexual experience. If you don't feel comfortable with someone, you don't have to do anything. And it's okay to wait until you've gotten to a certain comfort level, safety level with someone, because you can know all of these physical things and like, man, I know my body, I know what I like, but if this person is not safe, you're not going to enjoy it. And it may be even painful, because a lot of the times when you don't feel safe, basically a vagina contracts, and then it's really, really painful. So I think paying attention to physical preparation of safety and, all these things, but also the emotional aspect. You gotta feel safe. If you don't feel safe, it's just not gonna, all these physical preparations are not gonna make a difference. Okay, how do you learn to communicate effectively during sex? Okay, so here's the thing. A lot of couples are really embarrassed to talk during sex, right? And a lot of the times they've created a little bit of this negative cycle that if I redirect you, if I say something, then the other person feels a lot of shame, because like, oh, what I was doing, you don't like what I was doing, and now I feel really bad about myself. Like it's a personal attack, when it's not. So we really have to do a lot of individual work, right? If I get really upset, if I get really sensitive, or if I see your redirection as a personal attack, that is a you thing, an individual thing, and you got to work through that and realize, actually, this is a good thing that my partner is telling me what they like, what they don't like, because then our sex life is going to become so much better. The other thing is, if you have issues saying, sex, penis, vagina, breast, all those things, practice. If you feel a little too embarrassed to practice, with your partner, then practice in front of a mirror and say it out loud. Practice what you would like to say out loud. So when you say it, right, it's not this like, oh my gosh, I'm filtering a lot of what I'm saying, or I'm whispering it because I'm so embarrassed. Getting comfortable with everything that has to do with your body and sex. So if you don't have the level of comfort, that's fine. Just practice it, right? And definitely, I would say having a conversation when you're not engaging in sex makes it easier to then redirect and say something when you're having sex. So make sure you're having those discussions on sex. Don't wait like a whole year. It's like, oh, we haven't talked about our sex life for like a year. Like that's just not gonna work, right? It's gonna make it harder. It makes it more uncomfortable, right? So take the taboo and the discomfort out of talking about it by talking about it even more. So if it's really uncomfortable, I would say you need to talk about it twice a week. Let's start with that. It doesn't mean that you have to keep up to twice a week, for the rest of your life, just until like, okay, it becomes a regular thing and this is no longer super awkward. How can I be sensual as a woman to my partner? Oh gosh, I love this question. Okay. Well, this can really, I would say, it depends on the woman. It absolutely does. And this comes to really like, okay, when was the last time you felt good about yourself, right? Sometimes the word sexy alludes to the sexual, but it's really more about the sensual. And I think it is important to ask yourself, what helps me feel sensual, meaning what makes me feel attractive, what makes me feel like I can put myself out there with my partner. So it's not just about what you wear, right? It can, although it can be, absolutely can be. But it's also about what areas of your body you know for a fact are more sensitive. So you want to, in a way, exploit that and make a good use of that. So just an example, if you know like your back is just an area that you really, really enjoy touch, you really enjoy any kind of touch really, or kissing on the back, right? Then that is something that you can absolutely just communicate, right? Like, oh, let's give each other some back massages, because that is going to build on the sensual and you're going to be able to transition to the sexual. Flirtation is absolutely an essential thing, right? So how do you flirt, right? What works for you? How do you feel comfortable? That's why I'm like, it's very individual. All of these kind of like baby dolls and all of that, for a lot of women, that's when they feel the most sensual, right? So if you're okay with that, if that's something you want to implement, then then absolutely. Or an activity, it can be any activity, it doesn't have to be a sexual activity, right? Of something that helps you feel more comfortable in your body and in your ability to basically be like, okay, I'm feeling attractive and I can tell that I am sexually desirable to you, and I like that. So I think a lot of it is also accepting that when your partner tells you you're very sexually desirable to me, that you really internalize that. Because I've noticed a lot of females like really have a hard time with that, right? It's like, oh, you're just viewing me as a piece of meat, right? Which, can that happen? Yes, but a lot of the times it's more than that with your partner. So I think when they say that, it's like, can I let that sink in, right? Can I let that sink in and feel good about the fact that it's like, okay, just me as a person, I am desirable to my partner. So I think if there's any areas of discomfort you as a woman, you need to kind of figure out what those are and work through them. If it's about body image, if it's about shame, if it's about I don't really know my body, then those are all things that they need to be, you can experiment with and deal with so that feeling sensual can actually happen. Otherwise, it's just really hard to feel that way. Okay, my partner and I have excellent communication and openness. However, we still find it difficult to get her to orgasm and feeling desire for sex. What are we missing? Oh gosh, okay, so there's just a lot of things that, I mean, I don't know, right? There's a lot of details that I would want to know. Again, I would want to know if you're actually doing like direct stimulation with that and how you're going about it. If you are sure that she's aroused, right? A lot of females benefit from some amount of vaginal sex, right? And then taking that kind of break, which also helps the male to not, basically peak before she's ready. Taking a break to basically take the time to manually stimulate her. And so there's just a lot of details here that I'm missing. Desire. Okay, so if there's no desire, it's really hard to orgasm. You need to be feeling a desire. So what desire? That's the phase that is just okay. It sounds like you have a good relationship, right? Are we building anticipation, right? For her to be excited about sex. It's not just about, I want to cuddle with you and all of that. It needs to be, I am feeling very excited to be sexual with you, right? So if that is not what is happening, then we need to work on desire a little bit more. Anticipation, building anticipation. For her personally, right, it's like, can I get myself in the mindset of feeling sensual? Maybe a little bit more sensate focus. There's just a lot of areas that it's just like I said, female orgasm is complicated. So without more details, those are the things that come to mind. How can I as a woman get better at sex? Okay, so that's an interesting question because I'm not quite sure what you entirely mean by that. I think the first thing and foremost, obviously, is just getting comfortable with yourself as a sexual being, with your body. I have had so many clients that absolutely refuse to have sex with the lights on or any kind of light, right? They're just so ashamed of their body. They're so uncomfortable, or they really don't want their partner touching them in certain areas. So I think your ability to relax into the moment and just feel comfortable is absolutely going to help you not just enjoy sex, but I think be better at sex. Being a little bit more forward. I find that, again, just culturally, just men are just more forward with what they like. And it's just a lot easier for them to find that level of satisfaction because they do communicate that. So if you do not feel comfortable with that, I think, finding that confidence and like, I will ask, for what I need and what I want, absolutely helps you be better at sex, right? And asking your partner, right? Like, are you enjoying that? right? That's, I think, something that helps as well. Other than that, I'm not quite sure what you mean by get better at sex, like for yourself, for your partner, for both. I think if you do a lot of individual work, especially as females, that absolutely affects the whole relationship and your sexual life. How do you balance your hormone sex drive based on your period cycle and bridging mentally preparing for sex? Oh boy, we're getting into like this is the big kind of worms. Okay, so we have the two camps here of females. Okay, the females that absolutely feel super horny when they're ovulating, right? And the females that are like, do not touch me, I feel bloated, I'm in pain, I am just not going to have sex, this is just not gonna happen. So I think again, this is part of your knowing thyself kind of thing, right? So if you can, it might be even worth mapping out how just naturally your desire feels depending on your cycle. If you have a very irregular cycle, that's going to make it much harder. So maybe we need to get that cycle a little bit more regular before we can do this, right? But there's definitely periods throughout the month in which you're just going to be more primed for desire. That being said, desire is not just this thing that happens. So when you're saying Bridget mentally preparing for sex, that is a very conscious choice. So that's what I'm saying, that you need to be really comfortable with sex and with your own sexuality to decide to be sexual. So desire, especially for females, has this kind of like a choice situation. It's like, I need to be in the right mindset. What do I mean by that? I'm going to be thinking about my partner. I'm going to be fantasizing about my partner. I'm going to be, you know, whatever helps you feel sexy, right? I'm going to be, I don't know, wearing this certain kind of perfume because, you know, it smells really good and I really like it. I'm going to be doing this activity with my partner because it really builds that connection. I feel close to him and that really builds desire. So especially for females, there's times in a month in which you might not have to do a lot of that just because you're just naturally, you know, your hormones help with that and you're just finding yourself more easily aroused. You feel more desire, you're more easily aroused. But there's times in which it's not so much I don't want to, right? So that's one thing I've noticed that a lot of females don't recognize. It's not that you don't want to, you just haven't put in the work to build desire. It doesn't just happen. So I think that if nothing else, you know, for females in this presentation, put in the work to build your desire, talk with your partner because your partner can absolutely help you in building that desire. But a lot of that is just inner work on like, okay, how do I get myself into this sensual mindset? Basically, I ask all my clients, what turns you on? And a lot of the times they can't answer. Right? Like, I don't know. Like, okay, then we start there. What turns you on when you have been turned on, basically, because we call it turned on, right? Which is desire. What was it that helped with that? And we can build from that. So absolutely. There's times in which you might not want to, and that's totally normal. But you can absolutely, you do have a say in your desire phase. Men typically want more sex than women. How do you balance the amount of sex your partner desires to have? How should men temper their drive if the partner is not in the mood? Okay, so this is a big one, and this might probably be the last one. So that is the thing. We need to really change the culture that men want more sex than women. Once a woman is very much comfortable with her sexuality, right? Assuming there's no physical conditions, there's nothing there that would prevent her. I have noticed in healthy marriages, they want sex just as much, right? So a lot of the times when it seems like, oh man, the men want it a lot, it's because there's this imbalance in their sexual relationship, right? It's like, I want to feel connected to you, I want to feel connected, and I don't feel like you want to, so it makes me want to push for it a little bit more. So I think that's just a cultural idea, right? That is not held everywhere, right? If you go to other cultures, even like females are seen as more sexual than males. So this is more of a Western idea that men want more sex. where I would put it in terms of they're more comfortable with sex. So once females become a little bit more comfortable, it's a mutual thing, right? Now, does it happen that sometimes you're not in sync when you want sex? Absolutely. So how do you balance the amount of sex each partner desires to have? That's a tricky question, because is there like a right amount of sex that you should have during the week? No, like we don't have a set amount of like, oh, this is what healthy, during the week, how many times. But I think it is important, especially as the female, to know like, okay, how much of my, not wanting to have sex has to do with either the quality of the relationship or for me individually as a woman, right? How much do I really want to experience a sexual experience that is good and pleasurable? And am I enjoying sex? Because a lot of the times it's like, when it comes down to it, when I ask them like, is sex good for you? The answer is it's just okay. So when you put it like, oh, it's just okay, then it's like, why would I want to do it several times a week? It makes no sense, right? So we have to have an honest conversation, like, okay, how can we make it better for you, right? So it's something that you want a little bit more. And how should men temper their drive if their partner is not in the mood? This is a big one, right? It's like sex is optional. And this is unfortunately something that I see a lot. If the wife is like, hey, I'm just not feeling it, it becomes a big argument, a big conflict. It's a very personal rejection. So I work with a lot of the husbands to switch that, right? That it's like, okay, you're not in the mood. Can we talk about that? What could be contributing to that? Right? Is this stress? Especially if you're a mom, like talking about transition, I didn't go too much into that, but females that have little kids at home absolutely need a transition period from mommy mode to sexy mode. If you're still in mommy mode, you're not gonna be in the mood. It's just not gonna happen. So I think it is important to have a conversation, like, what is going on? Are you stressed? Are you just exhausted, right? That you don't have the energy for it? Or are you just not enjoying our sex life, right? And instead of being like, oh, I'm just so deflated, it's like, okay, what can we do about it? That's the whole thing about this presentation. There's so many things that you can do and that you absolutely should be doing, even if you already have a very pleasurable sex life, right? It's like, it can always improve. That's the beauty of it. So if your partner, is not in the mood, for the men, instead of like, oh my gosh, I feel so personally rejected, can we turn on the curiosity instead? It's like, oh, I wonder why, right? I wonder why. Like, I want to be close to you, like, and we can still be close, but I definitely want you to experience desire. What can we do to change that, right? So that's what I would say to that one. Instead of turning into a conflict, because then maybe becomes a pattern of, I don't want to say no, and I say yes even though I don't really want to, and it becomes a really not pleasant experience, and it just feeds on itself. Absolutely. If you're not in the mood, say no. And men, curiosity, I wonder why. Can we talk about it? That will create a much different interaction between you and your partner, and it will make it more likely that next time she will be in the mood, if that makes sense.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you also, everybody, for your great questions. We had so many awesome questions. Just wanted to mention that this webinar is being recorded. So I had a couple people ask if they can get the recording and to look back on, share with friends. Everyone will be sent the recording tomorrow, and you can also access this recording and all recordings of our previous webinars on our website, strongermarriage.org. And please fill out the survey when you exit out of this webinar. It'll pop right up, and it would be really helpful to get everyone's input on what they learned and what was helpful to them, so we can learn how to improve these webinars. Thank you so much, Denhi. You did so great. This was so helpful, and I know everyone here is super grateful for the Q&A session and this presentation. I'm seeing a lot of thank yous in the chat.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Of course. We'll see you guys later. Hope to see you at the next webinar.
Thank you.
All right, bye.